Thanks very much for having me. I got to say, this is the friendliest group I've ever spoken to. When I walked in, Bill here immediately plied me with food. And then he came over with a $50 check. And then he came over with a $40 check to buy one of my books for the award. And then he came over with another $40 to buy a book. Bill over here gave me a pen to sign books with tonight. And then Tom came over with a whole salad bowl full of cash. And all he wanted was a ticket for it. Somehow that transaction didn't complete, but I'm delighted to be here with you all. The approach I take in the book is I start when these guys are kids and I finish when they're old men in Kentucky. If you have 4 or 5 hours, I can give you the full version. You guys want that? What? Okay, all right. So tonight we're just going to do one chapter, which will be the 8th Virginia and more broadly the Virginia line at the Battle of Germantown. So I am going to go after some long-held conventions about the Battle of Germantown. This is specifically the Battle of Germantown from the Virginia perspective, which means we're not really talking about Cliveden the Chew House. We're way over under Nathaniel Greene tonight. And I've got one important source that I don't think has ever been used to analyze the Battle of Germantown. If I've missed it, I will be happy to be corrected. But there is one person who had very good reason to know a lot about it that hasn't been quoted, and there's a reason for it. So we'll see what he has to say tonight. Dun dun dun, right? A little bit of suspense there. So that, by the way, is the 9th Virginia Regiment at the Battle of Germantown. Does anybody know what happened to the 9th Virginia Regiment at Germantown? They were captured, the entire regiment. So that will be part of our story tonight. That is them getting captured. That's a detail of a painting by Don Troiani. Here are the reasons that are often given for why the Americans lost the Battle of Germantown. I'll just run through them super fast. So the plan was too complex, poor and inconsistent training, ineffective militia. Adam Stephen was drunk. The 13th Virginia were all cowards. Greene's column took the wrong road and arrived late. They had dated intelligence. The attack on Cliveden was a bad idea. Fog and smoke, they couldn't see where they were going. Consequently, obstacles were a real problem. Adam Stephen interfered in other officers' commands. Failure to support Colonel Matthews and Major Dark. Those are the guys who got captured in the previous slide. Friendly fire. And then I'm going to add these 3, the ones in yellow there. By the way, I'm colorblind. Is that yellow?
Yes, yellow.
Thank you. I feel affirmed. So the Pennsylvania, I'm going to accuse the Pennsylvanians. By the way, I'm a Pennsylvanian. I grew up in Chester County, so don't hate me. I'm going to accuse the Pennsylvanians of maybe, we should discuss this tonight, driving the British too far under Sullivan while failing to envelop the British left. Is that new to everybody? Has anybody ever heard this explanation before? Okay, it's just one explanation of several. I'm going to posit that lack of lieutenant generals in the Continental Army was a big problem. And Washington had just completed a bunch of overdue promotions, which means that a bunch of officers were commanding people they had never commanded before. Command and control problem, right? So, a little bit about the Virginia line. And having lived in Virginia now for 20 years, I've lived in Virginia, I guess, longer maybe than I lived in Pennsylvania. So I'm going to pick a fight with you guys. Okay? I'm going to talk a little bit of smack, talk about how great Virginia was in the first half of the Revolutionary War. So the 1st and 2nd Virginia were raised in 1775 on 1-year enlistments. Patrick Henry commanded the 1st Regiment. William Woodford commanded the 2nd Regiment. Neither of them lasted. Their enlistments were up in 76, so they all re-enlisted for 3 years, while the rest of the Continental Line was still enlisting for 1 year. Right? So that's important. Then in that same year, actually a little bit earlier in the year than the 1st and 2nd re-enlisted, Virginia authorized the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th regiments, all of them on 2-year enlistments, which expired in the spring of 1778 at Valley Forge. Okay? So going back one slide, that's the Battle of Trenton. All those guys standing behind George Washington are Virginians. The only problem with that picture is that George Washington was actually standing behind them. But they were the guys right in front shooting down King and Queen Streets. And then you will recall that before Princeton, all the enlistments were going to expire, everybody was going home. It's not true. It's only true for the New England, and I hate to say it, Pennsylvania troops. The Virginians were all staying for at least another year and a half. So through the Forage War at Princeton into the next year, they were the veterans, and really the only veterans in the Continental Army. And then under the 88 Battalion resolution from Congress, Congress authorized several more. And these guys enlisted in '77 for 3 years or the war in exchange for bounty land. So these guys were as green as anybody else. But 15, and then if you count Grayson's as 16, there were 16 regiments from Virginia. The first 9 were dominated by combat-tested veterans. But they were all under strength. After a year of war, company officers would go home to recruit, and people started making excuses. It got harder and harder and harder to recruit until by '78 they actually implemented a draft. So this is, in theory, what Virginia's force structure was like. It's the same as everywhere else, except Virginia regiments had 10 companies. Everybody else had 8. It was just the way Virginia did it. They decided for themselves when they first authorized the regiments. So 68 enlisted guys in a company, plus officers, musicians. A regiment, in theory, has 830 men, including officers and staff. A brigade, 4 or 5 regiments could have up to 4,000 and change. A division, usually 2 brigades, could go up to over 8,000 men, in theory. This is what the Virginia line looked like actually. And if you look here, so ready, so these are men ready to take the field. Nathaniel Greene's entire division is 525. So that's less than a regiment should have, if full. George Whedon's brigade, I'm sorry, not division, that's a brigade number. George Whedon's brigade has 952, so bigger than a regiment, but not equal to 2 regiments. And Adam Stevens' division, same thing, Woodford, has 669. Charles Scott's brigade, 528. So brigades are functionally acting the way that regiments had prior. Okay, this is my secret source. This is the guy who's never quoted. Who knows where Lafayette was? Where was he in the Battle of Germantown? Anybody know? Bethlehem. He got shot at Brandywine. So he wasn't at Germantown. But 2 years later, back home in France, he writes out what happened in his memoirs. Now, this wasn't seen for many decades, but he writes, and this is a guy who knows George Washington. He's on George Washington's staff. He's had 2 years to have multiple conversations about what might have gone wrong. And he writes, and I'll read this, General Washington attacked, and even though his left column retarded by an absurd precedence dispute between divisions strayed in the fog, and even though the advance guard under Conway attacked from the front, a position that should have been attacked from the flank. Ever heard that before? The enemy was nonetheless surprised and beaten, and the general with his victorious wing crossed the whole extent of the British camp. All went well, but then a false movement of the left column, and worse, an attack on a stone house that should have been outflanked, gave the enemy time to rally. So this is going to be the basis for the rest of my remarks. He's an objective observer. He wasn't there, but he's got every reason to have heard all the details afterward. So there are 4 elements to what he said. First, the left column, so that's Greene and the Virginians, coming down Limekiln Pike, retarded by an absurd precedence dispute between divisions straight in the fog. 2, the advance guard under Conway attacked from the front, a position that should have been attacked from the flank. 3, a false movement of the left column. And then finally, the attack on the Chew House. Okay, so first Lafayette says they attacked. The Americans significantly outnumbered the British and the Hessians. They were going to approach in 4 columns. The Greene's division was by far the largest because the plan was to push the enemy into the Schuylkill River. The axis that Sullivan was approaching on, they could have chased the enemy all the way to Philadelphia. There was nothing to press them against. And that doesn't seem to ever have been pointed out, but it's implicit in what Lafayette says. So they leave at sunset on the 3rd of October. They march 7 or 8 hours. They rest at 2 a.m. They're supposed to capture the pickets that intelligence has told them is out there. At 3, silently, no triggers pulled, only bayonets. Then they rest until 5. So they've got lots of time built into the schedule. And then at 5, they attack. There's no accounting for topography or exact placement here. This is what the attack would have looked like if perfectly executed. And of course, we all know that it was not. You've got John Sullivan's wing attacking on the American right. And you'll notice there are all these famous brigadier generals, Stone, Price, Hartley, and Humpton. You all know those names, right? Well, you might, but they're not brigadier generals. But they're serving as brigadier generals. And we'll talk about that more later. And then Nathaniel Greene's coming down Limekiln Pike from the top. And then you've got militia on both sides. The Pennsylvania militia down here, there's a deep ravine that the Wissahickon goes through. So this is essentially a separate operation. So we're not going to talk about them anymore tonight. Okay, so now we're going to look at Lafayette's 4 reasons for the failure. So Washington's left column, retarded by an absurd president's dispute between divisions, strayed in the fog. So first, this is my interpretation. The fog indicates that the time he's talking about is after dawn, because the fog doesn't lift until the sun comes up, right? So this does not explain Greene being late. It doesn't explain what happened on the way to Germantown. It explains what happened when they were coming into town, right? That's when the fog starts. The absurd dispute, because he's specific that it's on the left, that has to be a dispute between Peter Muhlenberg and Adam Stephen. Those are the only 2 divisions out there. George Washington asked Congress repeatedly for lieutenant generals. He wanted 3, 1 to command the left, 1 to command the right, 1 to command the reserve. And Congress wouldn't give them to him. He asked repeatedly, including before Germantown. He asked after Germantown as well. But here you've got 2 instances of Washington asking for it, and an instance of field officers writing to Congress saying, we really need this. Congress wouldn't do it. So here's another view of the Virginia line in advance of Germantown. Most of these numbers, this would be like in the spring when they congregated in Philadelphia and South Jersey, leading up to about, through about Brandywine. So Nathaniel Greene, he's not in white because he's not from Virginia. Adam Stephen is a major general, and then the brigade commanders are Peter Muhlenberg, George Whedon, William Woodford, and Charles Scott. On the way to Germantown, this is what it looks like. If they're in yellow, that means that they're in a temporary position for the day. Right? So Nathaniel Greene is pulled from his division to be the wing commander. Right? So he's playing lieutenant general for the day. Because he has been promoted for the day, Peter Muhlenberg has been pulled from his brigade to command the division. And because Peter Muhlenberg has been pulled from his brigade to command the division, Colonel William Russell of the 13th Virginia Regiment has been elevated to act as a brigade commander for the day. Because of that, Major Richard Campbell, who has belonged to his regiment, the 13th, for less than a week, is suddenly in charge of the 13th Virginia. Everybody's commanding people that they may not be used to commanding, maybe people they don't know. And it takes a while to start thinking like a general when you get the job. And it takes a while for a brigadier general to start thinking like a division commander. And nobody's had time to transition like that. And this was true in Sullivan's wing as well. So Major General Sullivan is pulled out to command the right wing. Brigadier General Smallwood has already been pulled to command the militia on the left. Because he's gone, Colonel Moses Hazen was therefore pulled to command Sullivan's division. So you got a colonel commanding a division. a job he's never had before, a completely different job. And then all those names that you were not supposed to know, but Tom recognized. All of those guys are colonels acting as brigadier generals under Sullivan. Lieutenant Colonel John Markham, he has just joined the 8th Virginia, and he's now suddenly in command because Colonel Abraham Bowman is sick or gone. Lieutenant Colonel William Nelson, I don't remember the backstory on that, but if you're in yellow, you're not used to your job. And this continues down, to the company level as well. I just don't show it. Okay, so that is all the consequence of no lieutenant generals, right? You've got a cascading effect from having to elevate temporary wing commanders. Okay, number 2 in Lafayette's list. The advance guard under Conway attacked from the front, a position that should have been attacked from the flank. The enemy was nonetheless surprised and beaten, and the general with his victorious wing crossed the whole extent of the British camp. Okay, so going back to the map, I think what this means is that Conway here, he is not just supposed to attack straight ahead, because that chase can go all the way to the Delaware River, right? He is supposed to get around the British flank and make them panic, right? I mean, we all know about enfilading fire and how you're supposed to flank the enemy line. He doesn't do that, he just pushes. Don't know why, but Lafayette clearly thought it was a problem. And over on the other side, Smallwood is supposed to do the same thing here, along with McDougall's guys from Connecticut. Doesn't happen. General Sullivan, who of course is in command of the right wing, he says the plan was to put at least 2/3 of the entire army under Greene. Their job was to push straight south, to push the British into the river, into the Schuylkill. Nowhere to run, they would be forced to surrender or swim. That's the plan. Greene doesn't accomplish that, perhaps in part because Sullivan's guys, specifically Anthony Wayne, was in their way. Now, it goes both ways, and we'll talk about that when we get closer. Then number 3, Lafayette's third reason is a false move of the left column. So again, this is Nathaniel Greene with Peter Muhlenberg, Adam Stephen, and Alexander McDougall's brigade of Connecticut guys. He's not technically in a division, so he's acting in his proper role there as a brigadier general. So the plan for the left is to come down Limekiln Pike. They're expecting intelligence says that there's a picket here of British light infantry at Lucan's Mill. So they're going to go in and they're going to silently, remember that's the plan, silently take them out at Lucan's Mill. And then at 5 a.m., they're going to go down into town and capture the army, press them into the river. However, when they come to Rock Creek up here by the Curtis Arboretum, they find there's a picket out there. And I can explain why the British got tipped off. So the light infantry picket up here, it's 3 companies. They run, but not until they've fired a cannon to alert their comrades. So they run down the road, and the Americans are still in a column coming down the road. And when they get here, Greene decides, okay, guys, it's time to form into a line. Here, by the way, is Lucan's Mill. So this is where Greene's column was supposed to first engage a picket. That was built in 1683, torn down in 1873, and was a major landmark in the city. That's what it looks like now. The Wingo Hocking crate that powered it is now sewer pipes 20 feet underground. I took that picture today. Okay, so they have formed into a line, and I'm sure it wasn't this straight, but here you've got Adam Stephen over here, Peter Muhlenberg over here, and Adam Stephen says, you know, those light infantry guys that just ran away from us, we need to get them. So he reaches over under Muhlenberg's command and asks the 9th Virginia, these are the guys that were in that first picture you saw, he says, go get them. George Matthews, Colonel George Matthews of the 9th Virginia, He and his men go chasing after the light infantry in the fog. Shouldn't have done it, because they don't report to him. They report to Peter Muhlenberg. If somebody other than Peter Muhlenberg is going to give Matthews orders, it should have been Nathaniel Greene, not Adam Stephen. Mike Harris makes this point in his book. So the 9th Virginians run off, and then Stephen's thinking, you know, I don't think that's enough guys. And he turns to the regiment standing next to the 9th, the 8th Virginia, and says, help them out, go follow them, go get them. Now remember Lieutenant Colonel John Markham, who it's his first day commanding, first time maybe in battle ever? He says, no, I'm not going. The major, a guy named William Dark, a real heroic guy, but also in his first day as a major for his regiment, he says, well, then I'll go. And he goes off with a third to half of the 8th Virginia Regiment. And they charge down to Lucan's Mill, and they capture the light infantry guys, or some of them, about 140, who have run. And they continue all the way down into Germantown. Now, I don't think it's clear exactly how far they got. One account says they got to or very close to Market Square, so like downtown Germantown. I took that picture today. There's Market Square, which oddly has a monument to the wrong war in it. So they may have made it that far. And then they realize, you know what? Greene's whole line is supposed to be right behind us, and we don't see them. They haven't come. Where are they? So they turn around and they start heading back. What has happened is that this is the line that looked so straight earlier. They are moving through the fog. They can't see. Black powder is making the fog even thicker. And they have to cross fences. They have to go through wheat fields. They have to walk around houses. They can't see each other. And the line starts to break apart. Matthews and Dark have captured the light infantry, charged this far down, and they turn around. And they're surrounded, and they get captured. So, the fog isn't the only explanation up here. You've got Adam Stephen bossing soldiers who are not under his command around. You've got John Markham refusing to follow orders. And command and control is everything on the battlefield, right? So if the officers aren't listening to each other, and if they're giving orders to people who don't report to them, you know, captains and sergeants maybe are starting to wonder, you know, what the heck's going on here? They can't see, they're stumbling around, and they just don't make it as far as they needed to go. Should have had lieutenant generals. So what also happens is, and I might be getting ahead of myself in the slides, but I'm just going to tell you now. So these two brigades end up on General Wayne's flank, and they can't see each other. They already hear shooting over here at Cliveden and think maybe they're surrounded. And they start shooting at each other here. It's not clear who shot at who, probably because they couldn't see, but at least one of these two brigades exchanged fire with Wayne, which ruined the whole thing, if it wasn't already ruined. Another picture I took today, this appears to be the top of Kelly Hill, where the 9th and half of the 8th were captured. That's William Dark, the major who followed Matthews. So the interpretation here is Lafayette talked about a false move of the left column. So a false move doesn't mean a feint or a fake thing. It means they screwed up, right? So this could mean failure to advance in a line. It could mean Markham's refusal to go ahead. It could mean dispatching Matthews and Dark foolishly or failing to back them up, either, both. Greene's failure to reform the line. He tried to do it. He tried to get them to stop moving and straighten up and then proceed. And they ended up running. Stephen actually ordered them to retreat. And he's the only general, I believe, who was on record ordering men to retreat. But the bottom line is they failed in the plan. They were supposed to push the army, the British army, against the Schuylkill, and they didn't do it. So then 4, an attack on a stone house that should have been outflanked. I don't need to tell you the story, you all know it. But I do note that it's Lafayette's last explanation of 4, right? So could it be that the Cliveden thing gets too much attention? This is where I'm going to make people mad, right? I'm not asserting, I'm just asking, so don't yell at me. But the focus is always on where Washington is. He was there. The main thrust was really under Greene, right? That was the plan. They were the ones to push, and if the Pennsylvanians pushed too far, they were just going to get in the way of Greene, and they had nothing to push the British against. So maybe they were too aggressive. Maybe they were mad about Paoli, right? And the House, honestly, it was attacked by the reserve line and under Maxwell and the artillery. So they weren't really part of the main line anyway. Now, the reserve could have been used, to be sure, but maybe Lafayette didn't think it was the biggest cause. So, Lieutenant James McMichael, he also, we're done with Lafayette's 4 reasons, by the way. Lieutenant James McMichael, who served in the only non-Virginia unit serving with the Virginia line, he says that the pusillanimity of the 13th Virginia gave the enemy an opportunity of coming around their flank. And we would have won had the Virginians stood to our aid. Right? So the 13th Virginia, a bunch of cowards. When they have the court-martials, a few weeks later, 13th Virginia is uniformly acquitted with honor on all points. So McMichael's wrong. It's not because they were handing out acquittals like candy, right? Captain Crump of the 1st Virginia was convicted of cowardice, kicked out of the Army, and it was deemed scandalous for any officer to ever associate with him again. John Markham, the guy that refused to go forward when Stephen told him, he was convicted of failure to follow up the advance and cashiered out of the Army. And then last but not least, Adam Stephen got fired. Apparently for giving orders to soldiers who were not under his command, among other things. But he was acquitted of being drunk that day. He was drunk other times. So what happened to these guys? They were locked up here in the Walnut Street prison, which was basically across the street from the State House, Independence Hall. Looks like a nice building, but it was not. There was no heat. They were not fed. The only food that was provided to them was by Quakers who went door to door with wheelbarrows collecting it, and then the British put a stop to that. This is a petition from a guy named John Chenoweth in my 8th Virginia Regiment, begging for support many years later. He's got great handwriting, doesn't he? He says that it was the dreadfulest suffering that ever mortally did to live, and they buried for a good length of time 7 to 8 soldiers a day. So the consequences of what happened at Germantown were pretty severe. When the British left Philadelphia in advance of Monmouth, they moved all their prisoners to New York. The enlisted guys were put on prison ships, including the prison ship Jersey that you hear about. The officers were mostly put on Long Island, specifically in and around New Utrecht. So this is Brooklyn up here, just for reference. They lived with families, but they had to pay for their own room and board. So the officers were writing letters home begging for money constantly. There was an exchange in, I think, August of 1778. Lafayette again, he says that the prisoners were crowded together in New York, where life on the ship was terrible. And then he says, when there was an exchange, 500 Americans, half dead, had been brought ashore. Most of them died there, and General Washington quite naturally refused to count them in the exchange. Pretty severe stuff. So what happened? Here are 2 officers after the battle. Colonel Walter Stewart from the Pennsylvania State Regiment. So this is the regiment that James McMichael's in, the guy called the 13th Cowards. He says, everything appeared in our favor when the unfortunate retreat took place, which cannot be accounted for. Like, we lost, but he doesn't know why. We were winning. What happened? Jonathan Clark, one of my captains from the 8th Virginia. The attack of the enemy before sunrise We attacked the enemy before sunrise and drove them for a considerable while, but something unfortunate happened and we were obliged to retreat. Doesn't know what happened. So, I'm just about done. Having gone through all of that, this is what I posit as reasons for the loss. The primary causes, I think lack of lieutenant generals really matters, right? It resulted in command and control issues. It resulted in officers second-guessing each other, specifically Stephen second-guessing Muhlenberg and telling his soldiers what to do. It resulted in single-day temporary promotions, officers in commands that they're not used to. Second cause is Adam Stevens' interference with other commands. That resulted in a fractured line and failure to support Matthews and Dark. The attack on Cliveden, and I have to explain that one. The Pennsylvanians perhaps drove the British too far while failing to envelop the British left. Fog and smoke. Secondary causes, stale intelligence. Secondary because all intelligence grows stale. It's stale the minute you've collected it. Green's column was late. Mike Harris says that he wasn't substantially late, but I think it depends on sort of how you count their first entry into the battle. If you count that first picket they took out, I think they could have been late. And then multiple recent promotions on top of the temporary promotions. And then minor causes, the plan was too complex. Well, they broke into four columns, but from there, they just had to time it right, and they had hours built into the schedule to make sure that they could stay on schedule. So I'm not sure it was too complex. Poor and inconsistent training, yes, it's true, but it was true at Brandywine, it's true everywhere else. Ineffective militia, sure, but they're militia. Adam Stevens was drunk. Maybe he wasn't drunk that day. Maybe he was just a little tipsy. Who knows? The 13th Virginia, well, actually, I need to correct myself. I wrote minor causes and non-factors. 13th Virginia were not cowards, dadgummit. So that's it. This is my website, Virginia 1776. That is not just me, but others. I invite other people to contribute to it as well. I have a Facebook feed that something goes out to it just about every day. Just little interesting tidbits. And I have a YouTube channel. Assuming this thing's working, this will be up there in a few days. And there's my book, which, as I said, I took a unique approach, right? So I start when the soldiers are kids during the French and Indian War, getting chased by Indians on the frontier. Most of the 8th Virginia guys were in Virginia's west. And then I take them up through the Revolutionary War. I look very closely and in detail at how they are recruited and how they form, and take them all the way through the war. And then I finish when they're old men on the frontier in their log houses, including Lafayette's tour of Kentucky in 1825. So that's what I have for you all today. Thanks very much.